And officially, on behalf of Jewish Unity through Diversity Institute, through the Certificate of Sephardic Ancestry, through Reconnectar, and Jeannie Milgram, we are really pleased to welcome back Dr. Roger Martínez-Dávila. And thank you also for those who help support our programs by donating with your registration and in general. So we want to say thank you to those who do, and please put a little plug there to continue it, because we want to keep offering these programs for free and we want to continue to expand upon them. The next programs will be January 21st and 28th, and with new speakers. So please make sure to check them out. Please make sure to join our mailing list. Today, we're going to be going back to the first reason I know of Dr. Martinez is about the manuscripts, because I was watching a course that he did online that helped us analyze the manuscripts and taught us how to do that. And so I'm excited today to invite you all to a little glimpse into these different manuscripts. Just to give a little bit of background, and I'm not going to give too much. I'm going to let Roger speak for himself. But one of the important things to mention here is his book, his first book, Creating Conversos, the Carvajal-Santa María Family in Early Modern Spain. And he continues to write about the crypto-Jewish experience throughout. I will let him continue because I think his research and speaking speaks for itself. So again, I will be monitoring. I'm handing over the floor. Thank you.
Thanks so much. It's really wonderful to be here with you. Let me go and start to share my slides, and then we'll go from there. So hopefully that looks all right.
It looks great.
Good. Well, it's so odd that, all of us, I think in many ways, are just kind of fascinated by something as despicable as the Inquisition, right? It's not quite gawking, but it's definitely, there's something grim and awful about it. And when I tell people that I study the Inquisition and Sephardic Jews, the expulsion and conversos across the world, they're like, huh, that's a really happy topic. But I think that's the challenge of our times today. And I think of history is like, how do we kind of like investigate these issues? How do we examine them so that, we're better educated as well as can kind of appreciate our own place in the world? Because often, I think, like many people, I get a little bit depressed about the current climate of the world, and I think, gosh, this is really hard. But I think when we start to put it in the context of the past, I think we realize not to argue for a progressive sense of history, but things are maybe in the arc of justice, that we're moving in the right direction. The other thing that I just wanted to say as I'm starting is this presentation really kind of prompted me to kind of really go back and take a look at the Inquisition really as a process. Because I think all of us, we know kind of like what happens at the beginning, and we know how it can end at the end with, auto da fe, a burning at the stake. But really, what is this mechanism? And so a large portion of my presentation really kind of will speak to, where does the Inquisition start? Well, I should probably turn the slide, right? So let's do that. Let me go here and advance. So our journey today is looking at first, what was the Spanish Inquisition? And it fits into our broader world of inquisitions. How did the institution operate? What are some maybe artifacts and objects of the Inquisition? And I'll be drawing three examples from the Bacal collection in Mexico City that we used for a museum exhibition several years ago. We'll take a look at the individual case studies, and you'll see a lot of the elements of repetitiveness of what they're looking for. And then we'll take a look at maybe some conclusions about its impact and decide, where to go from there. So to kind of maybe frame our discussion, let's consider the historical context in which the Inquisition emerged. This was not an isolated phenomena, but a tool of an imperial Spanish kingdom and the Roman Catholic Church striving to kind of impose religious unity during a period of immense transformation. And I think we just need to remember that, the era of, moving into 1500, it's transformative. We have consolidations of kingdoms all across Europe. We have the reconquest of Spain, culminating with the unity of Spain. We have the Inquisition being set up. We have the expulsion of the Jewish community. And then lastly, this encounter with the Americas, and whether we would call it a discovery or a conquest, that's a big discussion. So it's really transformative. It's a lot of uncertainty. Maybe perhaps like our own lives today, that we perceive lots of uncertainty. So that kind of creates a little bit of a tension, you can imagine. So, what are the origins of the Inquisition, looking from early heresies to the Spanish Inquisition? So, we see here a depiction of Saint Dominic de Guzman and the Abyssinians from 1493, depicting that Inquisition, and Waldensian witches in a manuscript by Martin Lafrance in 1451. I'm just going to mention my pellet stove heater is starting to kick on because it's about 20 degrees outside here in Colorado. So if it gets a little bit off, I apologize to you. So the Inquisition's roots trace back to the early Christian church's efforts to maintain doctrinal purity. As early as the century, ecclesiastical authorities sought to suppress divergent beliefs, viewing heresy as a threat to both spiritual and social order. This period saw the establishment of procedures to identify and correct, and that's a key part, correct heretical beliefs, laying the groundwork for later inquisitorial practices. So in the 12th century, the rise of movements like the Cathars in southern France and the Waldensians in northern Italy prompted a more structured response. In fact, in 1184, Pope Lucius III issued the papal bull Ad Abominatium, mandating bishops to identify and eradicate heresies in their dioceses. This directive marked the beginning of the Episcopal Inquisition, where local bishops were responsible for investigating and addressing heretical activities. Now, the Cathars, flourishing in southern France during the 12th and 13th centuries, were a dualist Christian sect, and they were rejecting the material world as inherently evil. They also opposed, and this would sound very familiar, opposed Catholic Church authority, denounced the sacraments, and it embraced asceticism. So this idea of really the renouncement of worldly objects. And subsequently, we also had the Abyssinian Crusade, which is from 1209 to 1229, and the Inquisition that led to their persecution and eventual suppression. Now, the Waldensians that we see on the right-hand side here, and you see the witches, were founded in the later 12th century by Peter Waldo, hence Waldensians, and emphasize poverty, the vernacular scripture. So if we think about it, the Roman Catholic Bible was always in Latin. It did not exist in vernacular or one of the European common languages. And this prevented basically lay preaching, everyday people preaching. So they also rejected papal authority and many Catholic doctrines. They were declared heretical by the church, and they faced centuries of persecution, but survived, eventually merging with the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. So I think what we see here is that heresy is really also about experimentation in religion, about change in religion. And as we can appreciate, many, many religious orders, whether those are Christian, Jewish, or Islamic or others, are resistant to change because they want purity. So by the early 13th century, the papacy recognized the need for a more centralized approach, as opposed to at the diocesan level, at the church level. And in 1231, Pope Gregory IX established the Papal Inquisition, appointing special inquisitors specifically from the Dominican and Franciscan orders to lead these efforts. The Dominicans are most remembered for this activity. And this move aimed to standardize the procedures across Christendom, assuring a more unified response to heresy, which is a terrifying idea, this centralized authority. Now, the Spanish Inquisition was established in 1478 by the Catholic monarchs Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabel I of Castile, and represented a significant, if we may call it, evolution of the institution. Unlike early Inquisitions, it operated under royal authority, so secular authority. Very different. So now there's this tension between religious authority and secular authority, with a primary goal of enforcing Catholic orthodoxy, particularly amongst converted Jews or conversos, encrypted Jews, and Muslims or moriscos. This period was marked by intense scrutiny and persecution. This starts really in the late 15th century, with the Spanish Inquisition become the notorious institution that we know it as today. And through its history, the Inquisition evolved in responses to perceived threats to church authority. So let's move along. So one of the first documents we can take a look at, and I'm really a document specialist, is a papal bull from appointing Thomas de Torquemada in 1485. And you can see from this papal bull this reference to Tomás de Torquemada, which shows you how much language is still evolving in the early 15th century, whether it was Spanish or English or German, all different ones. So the initial focus of the Inquisition was focusing on conversos, or these baptized Christians of Jewish ancestry who were suspected of secretly practicing Judaism, but it expanded in scope over time, and these included investigations from Protestants, also alumbrados or spiritual illuminists, mystics, and even Catholics who just strayed just a little too far from religious practice. Similarly, bigamists were investigated. This was particularly a problem during the 16th century because often Spaniards would have a family back in Spain and potentially one maybe in Colombia. So that was a big deal. Also, priests were accused of misconduct, often soliciting folks in the confessional, as well as indigenous peoples who were considered to be continuing to practice their religious beliefs. This broad mandate allowed the Inquisition to prosecute almost any perceived deviation from Catholic orthodoxy, and it made it a powerful tool across Spain and its colonies. So under the leadership of figures like Tomás de Torquemada, the first Grand Inquisitor, the Inquisition wielded both religious and political power, because again, this is under the authority of the Catholic monarchs. And it was in fact, in effect, all the way till 1834, which is terrifying to think. So one of the wonderful sources that we can use is one by Juan Antonio Lorente, and it's an insider's critique of the Spanish Inquisition. Shockingly, and this is a painting by Goya here, Juan Antonio Lorente, who lived from 1756 to 1823, was a Spanish historian, a theologian, and a former priest who served as the general secretary of the Spanish Inquisition in Madrid. And his tenure, as you can imagine, provided him with this direct access to the archives, allowing him to document procedures, trials, and systematic abuses. And in 1817, he published his, seminal work about a critical history in the Inquisition. Now, Lorente tells us about his motivation, and it stemmed from his belief that reform needed to happen, especially in the context of the European Enlightenment. And he hoped by exposing the injustices of the Inquisition that he could contribute to the growing push for its abolition. And still, again, it didn't end until 1834. And in his introductions, he states his intent very clearly, which was to reveal, quote, the truth hidden beneath centuries of secrecy, and close quote, and just shed light on the, open quote, tyranny exercised in the name of faith, close quote. So his writings reflect his deep concern for the moral and societal damage inflicted by the institution. Now, what we know from his own work is Lorente provided some unprecedented statistics. He estimated approximately 31,000, almost 32,000 people were executed by the Inquisition in all of its domains in the Spanish Empire, whether that's in Iberia or in the Americas or even the Philippines, if folks were being brought in from there. They were executed between 1480 and 1808, 32,000 people. And then tens of thousands of more were imprisoned or subjected to penance. His work detailed specific cases across the text, which is three individual volumes. So let's take a look at the next piece. So the formation of the Spanish Inquisition, which I've kind of indicated, started in 1478 under the papal bull or a letter from Pedro. I'm sorry, it was a paint. Here's a painting by Pedro Gete in 1500 CE, and this is of Pope Sixtus V. And it is the primary purpose for why they would begin investigating new converted Christians. And so we can think about it as this institution emerged as part of the monarch's effort to unify Spain under Catholicism after the Reconquista. And as Lorente describes in his history, the Inquisition was this indispensable measure for the security of the monarchy, which could not otherwise check this kind of turbulence of its society. Because as you can imagine, a lot of religious conversion, Christians and Muslims leaving, but also staying in Iberia, this imposition of Catholic identity, even just the imposition of the Castilian Spanish language, which is the most common form of Spanish spoken today. It was all about unification and suppression and a homogenization of society. Well, oh geez, it's a long morning already. Now, while this is primarily about religion, the Inquisition served as a tool of political control. So accusations against conversos were frequently driven by envy or rivalry, particularly as many held prominent positions. Lorente tells us that these prosecutions often deprived entire families of their honor, their wealth, and even their lives for crimes that existed only in suspicion and envy. So this is, another element of the Inquisition that I think we forget is that it was really about social control. Now, if you were unfortunate to be caught up in it and you were just a common person, you're in real trouble. At least elites, elite conversos, could fight back sometimes through different processes. And what we know is the first tribunal, the first beginning of the Inquisition cases began in Sevilla in 1480. So what does the language of the papal bull really tell us? So the bull frames the Inquisition as a response to the quote, open quote, offense of the divine majesty, the contempt of the said faith, the danger of souls, and the scandals of many. So this is the type of language that's being derived through the bull. And Ferdinando and Isabel emphasize the heretical praxis of conversos, most importantly. And in fact, in the papal bull, it describes, uh, those Christians of Jewish origin were respectively secretly practicing it in their homes, which had led to, and this is a rationale for it, had led to wars, the slaughter of men, and inopportune inconveniences throughout Spain. So that's the justification for the Inquisition. Also, it indicates in the papal bull that these offenses must be dealt with because there's basically negligence on the part of ecclesiastical leaders. And so for us to exalt the Catholic faith and the salvation of souls, which is the exact language of the bull, we need a new mechanism to do this. So the bull also specifically identifies who should be investigated, and that means anyone conducting themselves like Christians in appearance. So this is the key piece, right? Appearance and what you're doing in your life has a significant part of about how we assess whether or not you are a sincere Christian. It's no longer now about the act of baptism, it's about everyday practice and what you're doing with your life. So the objectives and the expansion of the Inquisition's mandate also grew over time. And as I mentioned, it included, investigations to Protestants, blasphemy, and then just even irreligious conversations. So you can see what's happening now. It's about ensuring religious conformity, that we want everybody not to stray from what the priest tells us and what the Catholic Church tells us. In particular, the Inquisition was interested in these alumbrados, these illuminists who use mystical language to describe their pious belief system. So this was so interesting. Some individuals that were, mystics like Santa Teresa de Avila were acceptable, but most were not. And this was about controlling who is speaking for the religion. Similarly, it was about policing morality. So, in the case of the bigamist, we really want to make sure that individuals are following the rules. And this included those priests who, according to Llorente, describes as who indulge in excesses incompatible with their holy office, and they needed to be disciplined as such. So you can imagine this is everything from relationships with parishioners to stealing money from the church, using church resources. It's a really kind of sophisticated operation to kind of control society. And lastly, it really became about suppressing indigenous religious beliefs. So to what extent, you could adapt certain kind of indigenous beliefs. So for instance, we know the Virgin Mary, the Virgin of Guadalupe, this kind of syncretic vision really is connected to Aztec religions and and if we can call it theologies. So in some ways, you could do certain types of Christianity, but not too far. And especially, we're worried about women who have too much power in this time period, which is shocking. Some of the early actions and figures, we discussed Torquemada, but we know the first tribunals were established in Sevilla and then in Cordova, and they became the nerve centers for inquisitorial operations, and basically spreads this kind of culture of fear and obedience across the country. What's interesting is you would have a tribunal set up in a city like Sevilla, but then have jurisdiction broader, so you could bring people in from other areas. So you could be, individual in some little town, but then you're really, you could be dragged out of there to a far-flung city to be investigated. Another piece of this was the issuing initially of what was called the Edict of Grace. And in the early operations of the Inquisition, it was individuals were invited to voluntarily confess their sins, to confess their heresies in exchange for leniency. And in many ways, what Llorente tells us, it was actually a means of entrapment, because the idea was there would be a gesture of mercy for those who confessed, but then it could open up larger investigations. So you can see the kind of the prisoner's dilemma evolving here, which is soon, individuals are confessing to different pieces, trying to get off lightly, but then, you have these kind of conversations. Well, we talked to your neighbor, Sebastian, and he says that you're doing this in your house. And now, oh, geez, it's going to get out of control. And that's where it really starts to really culminate in these ideas of the auto de fe, these acts of faith, these public spectacles of penance and execution. And so these were really these grim processions of the condemned, marching them under the gaze of thousands, reminding everyone who watched of the consequences of their heresy. Now, let's talk a little about the inquisitorial process, because again, I think it's kind of a mystery often to us about, okay, we know what it is, but what's going on here? So we actually are very lucky that we have different records from the time period. We have Eduardo Palares' inquisitorial procedure study. It was written by 20th century Mexican legal scholar. And then also this is based off the work of Torquemada. And we have the compilation here of the de las Instrucciones, the Santa Inquisición. And this was the first copy of the instructions for the Toledo Inquisitorial Tribunal, which was created by Tomas Torquemada. And so what he does in this text is we follow both the inquisitorial procedures documented by Professor Palares, and then also look at Torquemada's. We can really start to see, okay, what is the processes here? How does it work? So who is involved? So we have inquisitors, we have fiscal agents who are tracking money, we have the accused, and these all appear in the detailed case studies. What's happening here are there's procedures like secret denunciations, indefinite detentions, and the use of torture was permitted always. When is this happening? The primary like peak of activity is really the late 1400s and the 1500s, although it does extend more broadly. And as we've said, it's primarily about why eliminating these heresies inside the Catholic family. So let's take a look. So the initiation of an inquisitorial trial began from a denunciation to an arrest. So it began first with in 1550, for example, in the 1570s, we have like a repetitive process where there are edicts that are issued by the Inquisition that will tell folks, you must report suspected heretics, including family members. So we had the Edict of Juramento in 1571, which was a repetition that had started from the 1480s. But the idea is that you are required to report any kind of heresy. And if not, you can be excommunicated. Once an accusation was initially filed, the tribunal gathered testimony to determine whether formal charges should proceed. And the accused, which is horrible, were not informed of the charges or their accusers. It was a system designed to suppress defense and maintain secrecy. And in this sense, we really appreciate that there is no transparency in this process whatsoever. Often then the accused were arrested with property confiscation, which accompanied detention. And so according to the inquisitorial manual prepared by Torquemada, prisoners were dictated to be held in isolation and forbidden from communicating from others so that they could not kind of co-locate those stories or know what was happening. Secrecy, as you can imagine, was the most important component of the Inquisition. So it's the cornerstone of inquisitorial justice. So here are two manuscripts of ones that I've studied. You'll see one here. This is testimony in the case of Ana Gomez, and this is from the tribunal in Lisbon. So this is on the Portuguese Inquisition. And so you can see them documenting, you know, the person is studying the law of the Jews and that there is no Messiah that has come. So these is the transcription there. And it talks about that they were washing clothing and that they were doing things on Saturdays. That's not a very Catholic day of rest. And then also on the right-hand side, you can see just kind of the level of detail that is included in these secrecy documents. So this is an Inquisition record for a case of Agustin de Bezon, and this is in Madrid. And you can see there's a testimony that's running down the center of the page. Key pieces are underlined, so to index. And then we have a marginalia on the left-hand side. So you can see all these texts are working as a systematic system of documentation, but no one can view them except for the inquisitors. And in this case, there would be actually, you know, defense attorneys assigned to individuals, but even they do not have any access to this information. And so witnesses would provide testimony anonymously. And also, we know from the Toledo instructions that the identities of witnesses should be obscured. So we know from the inquisitorial manuals that says, even if witnesses speak in the first person, the publication must refer to a third party, hiding the identity entirely. So you can just imagine, it's like you have literally no rights in the system, this complete sense of secrecy. The other piece was just this idea of like extracting confessions. So the role of torture. This is another case here that I'm presenting for you. And this is for Ana Maria de Salazar. You can see her name there, Doña Ana Maria de Salazar, Mujer de Gaspar de Torres. And here you can see their trial notes that are being recorded. And there's a big, large star. This is a later script here, and it's indicating she has confessed on the 31st of July. In many cases, we know that torture was allowed in the Toledo instruction manual actually specifically states if there are sufficient indications of a heresy, but no direct evidence, then you can use torture. And this included the rack, a large flat device where you would be stretched out, often dislocating legs and arms in the process. What we know as waterboarding, where water's poured into one's face, where your face is covered with cloth. And then other types of acute pain, which I will not describe. It's a bit too vicious. I'm stopping because I'm trying to decide what to say here. So if you want to tune out for just a second, I will say just tune out for a second, and I'm going to wave my hand and say you can look back in. So one account from the Mexican Inquisition archives illustrates the brutality of this type of torture. And the account says, one arm was twisted with a cord as she screamed that she was dying. Further cords were applied until she fainted. And then she was revived to continue. So confessions were obtained under horrible duress. And I think, maybe may her memory be a blessing. May her memory be a blessing. So you can come back in. So, we talk about torture and it seems kind of distant at times, but these were real people and real suffering. And, this was what was done in the name of religions. Sentencing would happen often after lengthy trials, often spanning years. And when the defendants had confessed to a heresy, they could be reconciled, which means they would be allowed to perform certain types of penance. These included wearing the San Benito, or a yellow penitential garment, as well as confiscation of all their goods, and then often monitoring of their attendance of masses afterwards. Obviously, in the worst cases, it would be the case that the Inquisition would decide that you were irreconcilable and you would be burned at the stake. And that's where we have our public auto de fe. What's so astonishing to me at times about this too is the Inquisition also, and this is in earlier versions, would go back and investigate people after they had died. So they were so concerned and so, I would say, vehement in their persecution that they would investigate individuals. And so there's a case in the early Inquisitions for the Spanish Inquisition in 1313, where we have an Inquisitor, Fray Grimaldo, who prosecuted a man who died 63 years earlier in 1250, just to exemplify the reach of this type of justice. And this happened often in the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisitions as well, that a person could be investigated in absentia so that they could, if they could ever be located, they could be properly dealt with. Now, let's talk about some objects and artifacts of the Inquisition, because often, the documents don't fully tell the story that we want to see and aren't really, it's kind of intangible. So one of the things I wanted to show you was the seal of the Holy Office, the authority and symbolism of the Inquisition. So here we have a 17th century painting of the seal of the Holy Office. And this is in the Mexican collection of Alicia and Isaac Bacal. And it exemplifies the authority and symbolic power of the Inquisition. The seal was often crafted from painted wood or metal, and then they would it would be affixed to official documents as a seal, a sello. And this was both in a civil and ecclesiastical legal system. In this case, we're seeing a painting. So central to the seal was the cross, symbolizing the Christian faith and the Inquisition's mission to uphold Catholic orthodoxy. And that if we notice alongside of the cross, we see the sword, which represents the enforcement of divine justice and the punishment of heretics. And in some iterations, including this one, we see the olive branch, which was included the signifying the possibility for mercy for those who were repentant and returned to the church. So this is this tension that is supposed to exist inside of the Inquisition. Here, another piece from the collection of the Bacals is a 17th century crucifix of the Holy Office. And you can see on the left-hand side that there's a handle on the low hand. So this could be held in a procession. And you can see some of the plating is worn off in the middle of the hand-holding area. So you can tell this was actually used. And so often, these kind of poignant artifacts were used to lead processions and things like that. In this case, we actually have an inscription on it, and it talks about the divine origins of this particular cross. It says, "This cross was received by Brother Portacero from the hand of an angel in the year of 1631." So some such inscriptions elevated the object beyond mere craftsmanship. It presented almost as a relic imbued with divine authority. So these are the tools of the Inquisition. The crucifix is simultaneously something to be venerated, but also deadly feared. We can also look at even amulets from the time period. So there are possible interpretations of these in terms of wealth and identity and an inquisitorial scrutiny. So as I mentioned, they're often confiscating property from individuals. And here we can take a look at this colonial emerald amulet, again, part of the Bacal collection. And it shows both the personal devotion and material wealth. This particular intricate gold piece features a central emerald surrounded by 8 smaller emeralds. The central piece dangles from a pendant at the top, which is a crown-like element with another emerald. While the exact historical and symbolic meaning remains open to interpretation, it reflects kind of some complexity here that I just wanted to point out. So one, we could think about the emeralds as, and again, this is a personal piece of jewelry, as being associated with themes of growth and renewal and prosperity. So often we would find Converso families having things like these if they were affluent. And the green could symbolize, in the Jewish tradition, this idea of life and vitality, emphasizing the nature and fertility, even the harvest. We also can think about the emerald is even as potentially a connection to the high priest's breastplate, because we know that there were the 12 stones in it. And I think there is some reference, potentially it's debated, that a green stone, an emerald, was included in it. And in a colonial context, we can think of maybe even the emeralds and the amulet as a type of Catholic Marian devotion, a devotion to Mary, the Queen of Heaven. And so that's why maybe we have even this crown-like structure at the top. What it does tell us in the end, though, it is about material wealth. And any kind of display of ostentatious wealth like this was grounds for belief that maybe these individuals were maybe not so good people in the end. Maybe there's something behind that wealth. So in the last couple of minutes, and it's 10:42 now, I'm going to spend just about 8 minutes, and I promise to stop there so that we have some time for questions. We're going to look at a couple cases that show the lived experiences of conversos and crypto Jews in the Inquisition. And they're very repetitive, so I might not cover all of them, but I want to showcase a little bit of them. So the first one I wanted to show is the Carmona family's flight from Spain to the Canary Islands. And in this one, the Carmona family's experience under the Inquisition vividly illustrates the systematic persecution faced by conversos. From Sevilla to Córdoba and later the Canary Islands, the story kind of reveals a pattern of forced conversions, financial exploitation, and inquisitorial investigations. So, as early as 1487, we have Inigo de Carmona, who is being reconciled to the church in 1487, and it was recorded in the royal records that he had been investigated for reverting to Judaism. His possessions were confiscated by the Inquisition, but authorities ruled he could not be imprisoned for debt without prior approval. And because he was reconciled by the Inquisition and he gave up his possessions, he was allowed to return to his life. We can also think about other cases of, we're going to go to Mencia. This is the case for Mencia, and this is from 1595. And hers is a pretty tragic case. The trial was in Cordova, and she was accused of Judaizing, which was observing Jewish customs like the lighting of Sabbath candles and fasting on Yom Kippur. Mencia was subject to a public humiliation in the Alta de Fe in 1595 and the Plaza in Cordova. And you can see in the document, it refers to the law of Moses. So that's how Judaism was referred to. It talks about this reconciliation at the bottom of the page. And this is how we can understand this. And we see that she confesses, so we don't know exactly what exactly happened there. Another case is one from Medina de Rio Seco to Mexico in the Trevino family. This is a famous case that was transcribed, and it's from 1625. And here we know about the systematic kind of persecution of this family. We know that in 1624, Tomas de Trevino de Sobremonte was a prominent family member in the city of Oaxaca, and he was charged of Judaizing. He indicates in the records he was baptized a Christian, yet lived in observance of the law of Moses, conducting rituals and fasts contrary to the holy faith of the church. And so this is what we also see, which is very, I think, interesting about understanding Sephardic Judaism and Conversos, is that one might convert initially to escape and really following Maimonides' advice to pursue safety before returning to your faith. But here, by 1625, this is really catching up with him. And although he confessed under duress, he was initially spared execution, but later, by 1649, he had returned to his Judaism, and there was a second trial. And that's where he declared, in the records it says, he declared openly that the law of Moses was the true law, and the Catholic Church worshipped idols made of wood and metal. And that sealed his fate. He was executed on April 11th. May his memory be a blessing. Another family, thinking about from Portugal to the colonies. So there's a Portuguese Inquisition. And then here we find the case of Marquesa Gomez, who was a new Christian. In her case, the family was forced into conversion in 1497. And this was a forced conversion where the Portuguese king dictated any Jew living in his lands was now a Christian. And in her case, Marquesa was initially imprisoned in Lisbon. And again, what are they accused of? They're accused of observing Jewish fast, of avoiding pork, of lighting candles on the Sabbath. And in this case, she finally did confess in 1555, and she was penanced and given an extended prison term. Another member of the family was eventually exiled to Brazil, and this could happen too. So there's a type of banishment. And I'll just mention this one just briefly, and that's the case of the Espinosa family of Toledo. And in this trial, you see references to the God of Adonai and this issue of ropa limpia, washing clothes, and uh, speaking Jewish sayings. And what's so interesting about this one, about the Mendozas, and this is in the 1720s, is that they were descendants of the great Cardinal Mendoza, who during the 1500s had written this text called El Tizón de la Nobleza, the stain of the nobility, where he cast out all the noble families to say, you all have tainted blood. So, just to conclude in this last 2 minutes, just some initial kind of conclusions about suspicion, orthodoxy, and identity in the Inquisition's shadow. I think what the cases show us, they shed light on how the Spanish Inquisition's machinery of suspicion, enforcement of Catholic orthodoxy, and redefinition of identity profoundly impacted early modern Iberian society and beyond. These trials kind of illuminate this interconnected societal forces that shape life for both the accused and the wider community. Like suspicion permeated daily life, fostering an environment where trust eroded within neighborhoods, families, and even professional networks. Denunciations often stem from jealousy or personal rivalries, as seen as in the Carmona's case, or just even the accusations of lighting candles in one's house on a Friday, or that you didn't eat pork when your servants were around them or neighbors had visited. These kind of seemingly innocuous behaviors were reinterpreted through the lens of heresy, creating a culture where traditions were perceived always as, are they Catholic or are they deviating? And they were always met with distrust. The Inquisition's enforcement of Catholic orthodoxy also extended beyond religious conformity to encompass entire societal control. And so, through the auto de fe, the Inquisitors publicly demonstrated their power while reinforcing the supremacy of the church. And it shows how Inquisitors could turn punishment into a spectacle and to feed their own economic interests, but also bring terror to the lives of other folks. I think probably one of the most important things to appreciate about it is how it impacted identity. And it's a kind of a big outcome for this. Accused families were forced to publicly reconcile with the Catholic Church, effectively stripping them of any connection to their Jewish heritage. And even when publicly reconciled, the stigma of heresy remained and marginalizing these individuals and families for generations. So, as you can imagine, this is a systematic effort to eliminate Jews and Jewish custom and Jewish beliefs from society, and it was particularly effective. Ultimately, it really transformed society, creating a whole institutionalized world of fear, of identity through coercion, and imposing orthodoxy through total power. Um, Thank you for your time and your attention today.
Thank you so much. There's a lot there, as we all saw, and it was really, really appreciated it. There are some questions, so I'm going to jump right in. Before I jump in, actually, Roger and I had discussed before we started this big project that if there are larger questions, we would also have a question and answer session, just open for questions and answers. So if some of the questions are too big today, hopefully we'll be able to schedule one of those as well. And also please send them in to me in an email. So I'm going to start reading them off while Roger is responding. Please know that I will be inviting you to open your cameras and microphones. Don't open your microphones unless you have to say something at the time. So please do accept to come back as a presenter. We are not asking you to present, we're just asking you to open your cameras. So first I'm going to read off just that I really appreciate your moment of emotionality as a reminder that we are talking about real people and not just partaking in historical discourse. And it got to me too. So thank you for that. It really helps. And when Jeannie speaks also, you see them. I think a lot of people who have that connection in the family It's like you see, it's speaking to you personally. So I just want to say I'm reading that off. And a question is, how can I get more information about a specific Inquisition case? I don't know how to access the Inquisition files. I would appreciate any guidance.
Sure. So again, thanks for all these questions. And also I'm going to just type my in the comments my email address. You should feel free to anytime contact me. I'm not the best at responding immediately, but I will get back to you. So if you have additional questions, please do reach out to me. Um, the best place often that we can find the Inquisition cases, if you want to see the originals, is actually in the PADES system. And PADES is the National Historic Archives online for Spain. And I think that is a great place where you can type in individuals' names and actually do searches for them. And let me get the link for that real quick.
And while you're getting the link, I also want to note that jeanniemilgram.com has also uploaded quite a few of these documents. So
Let me I'll share this really quickly. I'm going to open up this and I'm going to share this because I think it's kind of neat to see it. Here we go. Okay, this is a link actually to PADES. So this is the digital archives of Spain, and it hits all of their different archives. Curiously enough, this one here, the Archivo Histórico de la Nobleza, the historic archive for the nobility, has some of the best records about Jewish people, which is the dirty little secret about Spanish history. Most of
right.
the Inquisition cases are located in the Archivo Histórico Nacional. But I just want to show you something interesting here. And is you can do just typing in Inquisition, and I'm going to type in Mendoza, that name. Now it's going to bring up a ton of records. Only 10% of the records, digital of archival records, are probably actually digitized in Spain. So you just seeing the tip of the spear here. But here's the Autos del Tribunal de Inquisición of Mexico. It'll give you a quick discussion of what it's about. Put that in Google Translate, it'll help you. And then you'll see sometimes they do actually have the original documents that are transcribed or the original documents as they existed. Sorry about that. It's just not very good with my mouse today. So that's kind of a neat tool to kind of look at if you want to start digging in, if you want to start looking into your own family.
Thank you. Let's see. What's the issue with washing clothes? What basis is there for the emerald jewelry being connected with the Inquisition? Those are two separate questions, but
Fantastic questions, Mr. Foster or Dr. Foster. Primarily, what they're looking for is washing of clothes on Friday and placing of clothes on wearing new clothes on Fridays and Saturdays. So it's really a specific behavior to a specific day of the week. And this shows actually kind of a misunderstanding inside of Christian communities about actually what Jewish communities do, right? So in this case, they what they know is like Friday's a big day and they stop doing stuff, and then on Saturday they all seem to be really neat, and so that gets assigned as a behavior, as a Judaizing behavior, which is completely crazy. The other piece I think is important about the emeralds. It's in this case this is the difficulty about it. We don't have any of these pieces of jewelry anymore that exist anymore. I mean, it's not like the Inquisition kept them all in a big safe and kept them. So it's really disappointing. So what we can do then is Alicia and Isaac Bacall, Dr. Bacall is a very significant scholar of the Mexican Inquisition. And she has an enormous collection where she's collected period pieces from those eras that would be representative of. So in this case, can we really say this is a Sephardic Jewish piece of jewelry? Absolutely not. But what it does show us is potentially the milieu, the kind of the types of things that would have been in that environment, and how through the lens of the Inquisition, those things might be interpreted, right? Because it's about wealth, ostentatious. Maybe it's the green, that they might also decide, oh, it's green. Well, we know that the Prophet Muhammad, his favorite color was green. Maybe they're Moriscos. So it's all this kind of reading into things that are really not really there.
And that kind of leads into Yitzchak's question. I don't
So,
know, do
so
you want to
what
ask?
happened to the confiscated
Oh,
property, like the jewelry? Is it sitting in the Vatican somewhere?
Oh no, no, good question. Excellent question. No, no, no. They're much too practical for that. They would sell this on the open market and use it to pay their salaries or maybe go to lunch. It's horrible in every way. That's how the Inquisition was funded, entirely, almost entirely from the earnings and the possessions of the accused.
Yitzchak, do you want to ask?
Yeah, about Muslims, what comparisons can you make about the accusations against Muslims? The Inquisition against the Muslims was much later and more in Spain, but have you researched this? Do you see any similarities? And even in Mexico and New Mexico and northern Mexico, what do you know about cases where Moriscos were detected?
I super, super appreciate the question, Dr. Karam, and it's good to see you. It's wonderful to see you. I have never seen a case for Moriscos in the Mexican Inquisition files. They may exist, but they're a rarity. And I think what we find, if anything, they would probably show up in the category of general heresies, or the language would be uh, um, erroneous propositions is the language they would use, something like that. And that's where you would really have to start to dig through those pieces. What I could say back in Spain, though, what we really see with the Moriscos, especially by the mid 1500s, the Moriscos now are staying in Spain, but they're always viewed through this Ottoman lens as this kind of front that may expose Spain and Europe to an Islamic threat. And so, very similar to conversos, often we know that Moriscos would pursue confessions actually with known Morisco descendants. So they would go see a priest that was a Morisco, who would be very lenient with them, because as we know in the Inquisition periods, often you had to receive a receipt for going to confession to demonstrate that you had been properly penanced that year. So the Morisco cases, I think, are fairly similar in terms of behavior, but it's not a specialty. So I should be careful what I say.
Isaac, did you want to ask your question?
My question was, did the church ever apologize in any way for the Inquisition?
Uh, I don't know. I think one of the most important things you can always say as a professor is, I don't know, because it's important to kind of be honest. There certainly have been, I think, acknowledgments of the Inquisition. There may have been a 20th century acknowledgement and maybe an apology for it. But I think what we get really instead is what we like see out of Spain, right? Which is, well, we feel really bad about this, so we're going to offer you citizenship. So you can come back to Spain if you would like to. And, you know, there's no apology. It's just an acknowledgement that, yeah, this happened, and maybe you have a right to be here. You have a right to be here. We'll see. But I don't know of any kind of formal kind of explanation or apology for the Inquisition. Absolutely not. In fact, what I would use actually instead is actually the case of the Santa Maria family, which was the rabbinic Levi family of Burgos. Their descendants became so prolific throughout the Roman Catholic Church as bishops and priests and things like that, that by the I think 1700s, the papacy had to come out and issue a papal bull and said that even though the Santa Maria families are really levies, they were always old Christian. They were never Jews, and we officially acknowledge them as old Christians by the wave of a hand. So, never really kind of an apology, but rather making it possible for their descendants to continue to work and participate in the Catholic Church. If that's an apology, I think that's the closest it gets.
Thank you. Can we take one more question? Is that okay? And then the bigger ones I'm going to put at the side for next time. But Betty, your hand is raised. Is that on purpose? Okay.
Yes. My question is, hold on, I put the video on. Oops. Yeah. So the question is, I'm not a historian and probably I misunderstood, but I think you said there were 32,000 executed. Last time we had the talk, he said there were about 300,000 Jews before the Inquisition, 100 died, 100 escaped, and then 100 became Christians.
Excellent question. Excellent question. Right on. So this is the real problem of statistics that we have. So unfortunately, we don't have a Bureau of Statistics or a census.
I may have misunderstood what he said, or maybe I'm confusing too. I don't know, but that's what I remember, and I wrote.
So I think in this case, what he specifically was referring to is the 1390 pogroms. So in the 1390s is the massive pogroms across Spain and the Iberian Peninsula, where 100,000, the numbers we use are 100,000 Jews were killed, probably 100,000 chose to leave voluntarily from Iberia, and maybe about 100,000 converted on within a 10-year period. So that's where that number comes from. And then what we really don't have is really good testimony for like how many executions, how many cases. So that's why I turned back to Llorente, who was an inquisitor himself and wrote this inquisitional manual. For someone who is, as erudite as he is and knowing the records, I think in nothing else but it tells us, we know probably for certain 30,000, 32,000 were executed, but that's probably in the low end. And honestly, in the end, does it, at a certain level, it doesn't almost even matter because the society was so oppressive. So, it's the worst case scenario is you're going to die, but then everybody else who is of Jewish or Muslim descent, frankly, is always under suspicion. So you live in a perpetual state of like fear and anxiety. So certainly death is worse, but that type of life is hard to imagine.
Right, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for your questions, and please continue to send them in. I'm going to send you the follow-up email with the recording. Thank you, Roger. This was enlightening as always, and I look forward to seeing you back. I look forward to seeing everybody else coming back with our upcoming talk, which is going to be back with Rabbi Dr. Pereira on January 21st, followed by Professor Ronnie Perelis on January 28th and February 4th.